One thing the people online last time said was sometimes it's hard to tell who's talking. So if you think about it, maybe at least the first time you say something, maybe say your name. Because, you know, we're all used to seeing everybody's picture and their name. And so maybe just say, hey, this is Jane. I thought, blah, blah, blah.
I didn't read the book, so I won't be talking.
I don't think, I don't.
Much. Yeah, too much.
Oh, come on, we don't believe that.
You can ask for a minute. You can ask questions.
Yes.
Okay, we do have quite a few. Admit all. Here they come. Hello, online people.
Oh, good to see you soon. Yeah, I know.
Can you hear us okay? Give us a thumbs up if you can hear us okay. Of course, I'm sitting right next to the microphone, so you can probably hear me just fine.
I want you to convince Fish Creek to keep Zooming as well.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of setup, so not everybody wants to do it.
Where does she live? But I'm glad you're not the shadow person this week.
Better, yes, thank you. All right, I think everyone's in that's going to come in.
She's doing great.
Okay. All right, here we all are. She doesn't pop up, but thank you for everybody that's here, everybody online. I hope you'll be able to see and hear okay, and I hope we can see and hear them okay. If anybody sees somebody pop in late, feel free to let me know if I don't look. All right, so Stranger in the Woods. Let's jump right in. What did we think of Christopher Knight?
He was strange. Yeah. Unusual guy. He's a different bird, yes.
He just was who he was. He couldn't help himself. Right. Yeah.
Amazing he could do that for that long, wasn't it? It's like he hadn't thought it out beforehand much. How he was going to get food, because he ended up breaking into the cabins. I was just astounded. He stayed in the same place, basically.
I'm familiar, but
I'm not sure he did it all alone for that long. I mean, I know he says he did, but
You're one of the skeptics of it?
I'm a skeptic. Do I think he lived there most of the time? Yes. Do I think he was different? Yes. And he stole things. He robbed from people. He took their peace of mind. He did amazing things, but I think he probably had some forays into talking with people or having some contact.
Now, why do you think that? Because there were a few people that were on that documentary that, and in the book too, that made that same comment, that they just don't think he could possibly have done that all by himself. Why do you think?
Yeah, because he wasn't as filthy dirty as I think of somebody that living out in the woods. He kept up on current events by listening to a radio. He just wasn't as out of it as I thought somebody who had not had any contact for 27 years would be. He still had some humanity with him, and maybe a little strange, but yet.
How many think that he did something, saw other people lived a different?
No, I think it would be possible. Well, he was reading a lot, so yes, and he listened to the radio. He did have this.
I think it might be.
He wasn't just
and the TV.
He was without other people, but he participated in other thoughts with the books and the radio. And
You know, I think about people like, and I don't know enough, so I can be corrected, about like Nelson Mandela, who was in isolation for I don't know how many years and survived with, I guess he had reading material, I don't know. But not very much human contact, I don't think, if any. I don't really know, but I think it's possible, considering. And he could have showered. He could have showered at those places. Well, maybe they probably close up their cabins.
No, he broke into them all year. He broke into these places all the time.
Oh, so he could have showered it.
Yeah.
But when they compared solitary confinement, because that's what they did a lot of times, they compared it to a solitary confinement person in prison.
Okay.
And that to me is so totally different. You are in this little, you know, and he had the opportunity to be outdoors and see birds and animals. And like you said, he had his little TV set, he had his radio. So to me, he was not in any kind of solitary
But he could have done it
confinement.
without other people.
Same thing. It wasn't comparable.
No, I didn't think it was either. And yet a lot of the psychiatrists and the people that were examining him would made this, you know, oftentimes made a comment back to solitary confinement people. And I thought,
Well, I just meant about the people, about not well, I think he could not be with other people.
But actually the people in solitary confinement actually would see people because didn't people have to bring them food, and didn't they, even someone in solitary confinement, don't they get like at least a half an hour?
I don't know.
Exercise.
Yeah, they get
That's what they said. They took them all.
Or something, yeah, it's not a big, but so that they still have a little teeny interaction with a guard or somebody. And he says he twice he met people. Yeah.
But he had a lot, and reading gives you a whole world to think about. So
well, and didn't they talk about him being on the spectrum, Asperger's or whatever a little bit? And I think people that have had that, they react different to human contact than other people do. I had a roommate with that, and she did not like physical contact. Or, you know, if you tapped her on the shoulder, she wasn't so fond of that, you know, things like that. And as time went on, I think they become more into themselves, but they're usually very bright, so they can sustain their minds working all the time. And I believe he could live like that and keep up a routine. She likes routine. That's the other thing. She liked a lot of routine, but her own beat to the drum, you know.
But he had to put a lot of effort into just day-to-day life.
Right.
I mean, it took quite a bit of time to climb up the tree, to put the antenna in for the radio, and to think of what his next foray would be. You know, whether it was going after that one lady in the video, the documentary Rice Krispie bars, and she mentioned, I got a kick out of that one, but or eating the chips in her house too. I think she was most affected, it seemed like, in that documentary, of just being really creeped out by him. I kind of viewed him as not harmless necessarily. I viewed him as being on the spectrum too. And I taught special ed for a long time. So I could see some similarities to spectrum, not defining autism in that way at all, because it's very individual. But I think he spent a lot of time just thinking about what his next move was going to be. And what boat did he have to commandeer if he was going to get propane? You know, so I was kind of intrigued by him.
Wish that he had been more self-sufficient, because it's hard for me to fall for this at all. And he did it on other people's backs, a lot of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it started out with him driving with a car that he just bought, that his brother co-signed, and he left somewhere and left the brother then holding the bag. And I don't think they never talked about, did they attribute this car to the brother? I mean, how did it?
no, there was something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the brother did,
paid it off, yeah.
But he left him holding the bag, is what it amounted to.
Yeah.
And the same thing with stealing from everybody. I mean, I couldn't feel warm and fuzzy about him. That's
I
for
didn't
sure.
feel warm and fuzzy, but his personality, like I said, intrigued me. Yeah, I mean, it was in different times he broke into people's camps. So.
Go ahead, Janet.
So maybe I'll make a couple comments at once, since this is this awkward hybrid. First of all, I really appreciated the link to the documentary. I found that much more interesting than I found Christopher Knight to be. But it was really nice to be able to visualize, and I'm sure when we were reading it, we all had a visual image of what these cabins around North Pond or these cottages or the camp, as they referred to it, looked like. So I thought the fact that the one woman was really willing to speak, I'm sure there were lots of people as upset as she, but she was willing to speak to a camera. I mean, think about how many people just aren't willing to do that. So
Right.
Documentarian found, you know, a dozen people who were willing to say something, and she was one of them. And it was interesting that some of the folks in the town still found his whole saga to be charming, but it was clear from listening to her that if you feel like you're endangered, you know, it's not charming. So even if she thought that, she did think probably that he wasn't going to physically harm her, she didn't feel safe being there by herself because he would break in. And I guess my final comment is that I found him completely uninteresting.
There's a gentleman that, and my husband was telling me about him, and I meant to get his name, but he went to Alaska. He was a retired military man, but he went to Alaska and he lived on his Social Security. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't remember his name, but yes.
And he built his own log home. Right. He did all his fishing and hunting, and he lived basically as a hermit, except that he had enough money for a plane to come in every.
But he lived off the land more than this guy did.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. He totally lived off the land.
See, that's our stereotype for a person like this. Now you have to give this guy credit. He says, I can't do it this way, so I'm going to rob. I'm going to get all these propane tanks. I'm going to do all. When I saw the documentary, the number of propane tanks. That was disgusting.
Yeah,
that was. Really, when you think about it.
Was.
So that's where I think his resourcefulness is much different than our stereotype for somebody who would live off the land.
Right, but I guess I was trying to equate him to the fact that he lived a very solitary life though too, but did not have to steal. And he lived in, I think, if I know the story, he lived way into his 80s. And I mean, he's living in Alaska and dealing with everything that Knight did, except as you said, he did it without having to.
But he knew how to hunt and fish. That was the main thing. Yeah, that was different. I don't remember his name.
I don't either.
Yeah.
Now the fact that he was stealing, but he said he had a moral code.
Yeah.
And there were some things he would and some things he would not steal. Does that
does
that make a difference?
From permanent people there, right? Only from part-timers.
That's because you're not up here every week.
That's right.
So I'm safe because I live here year round. He would be.
Can I share something?
Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to give a slightly different perspective on this. I am in a study group that meets weekly with some Buddhists, with a Buddhist priest who used to work in the prisons. And a lot of her people who participate in this class are ex-prisoners. And so I recommended this book to this group, and several people read it, and their take on it is very interesting. The Buddhists in the group were very interested in the realizations that the moral thing aside of what his stealing and living off other people rather than being self-sufficient and living off the land. I mean, that they just put that aside, and they were much more interested in the realizations that came to him internally in terms of his spiritual awakening and connection to nature. Buddhists were very interested in that. And the way Finkel described it and found it very interesting, the other sources he brought in, like Thomas Merton and other people talking about that. And the ex-prisoners were absolutely fascinated with his life and how they had struggled in isolation in prison, and seeing if they had only had his insights or had his, they'd wished that they had been him, you know, in order to deal with the prison life, and that this Buddhist teacher had really saved them and made it easier for them to deal with their many, many years in prison, and now they're out. This is a fascinating group that I have the great privilege to be studying with. So it was just serendipity that we read this book now, and I happened to recommend it to some people and was able to talk to them about it. But if that helps you in order to appreciate this story in another light, rather than just judging him and his, you know, him really using people and all that, yeah, put that aside and see what else is there. Might be an interesting way to look at it.
Well, I thought he did have a pretty good moral compass. He knew it was wrong. That was the way he was raised. He knew it was wrong. But survival instinct takes over everything. If you're going to, you know, if it's a matter of life and death, you are going to do what you need to do, whether it's right or wrong. And
when you walk to the 7-Eleven, I mean, I don't buy that at all.
Survival by himself. I mean, obviously you want to be by yourself.
And I get that, but it's not right to do it on somebody else's back in my mind.
It's wrong. Yes, it is wrong. Yeah. But the survival instinct, you're going to do what you need to do.
Well,
that's what you can do.
That it was wrong.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know it was wrong.
Did he plan on staying so long for him?
It didn't sound like he planned any of this, did it?
No. So, you know, you think after 27 years he had it figured out. You know, he talked about how he knew how many propane tanks he needed over the winter. Right. He knew all that. How did he learn that? Why did he not freeze to death that first winter when he hadn't figured out how many propane tanks to steal?
When he had hold that winter.
Yeah, you know how.
Yeah,
like how many? Well, I learned some of these. I mean, I get the whole, you know, you're living on the land and you see some berries and you eat them, but you know, the other stuff that he did, the rigging up of the antenna and all that stuff. Where
his high school picture says computer technician under it, and as someone else said, if in fact he was on the spectrum, which he may well have been, they do tend to be fairly bright people,
but even
thinkers.
Bright,
so he may have had a way of figuring out, you know, I survived for a week on this much propane. It's cold. I'm going to need this much.
Oh, okay.
You know, I mean, he does these, you know, who knows, calculations, and it's like the Rain Man, you know.
He certainly had plenty of time to think about it.
Yeah. I had time for trial and error, you know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, because they talk about how he walked on the rocks, so he didn't show his.
Which is very interesting to me with the backwards. That's another sort of sign of a sort of an odd way of thinking. Yeah.
And isn't that too, that in all those years he never really hurt himself? That would be a real thing.
Yeah, he must have Lyme disease or something like that.
Oh, something
outside. Yeah, all the time.
But he started when he was 20, so you know he's not like he's not.
Yeah.
He's 47. Yeah, but still, I would think you might fall. You know, you might have some.
So he did I think he did comment that one time he did fall and got hurt, but he
fixed it.
Yeah, right. I don't remember what it was. He fortunately didn't break anything because then he might have been in trouble. But I think again, you know, he got used to doing that, and I think you can probably.
Is he still alive?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, he works in the community. Is that right? He works in the community.
That's what that documentary said. I don't know how long ago that.
It's so interesting to me.
Yeah, I couldn't. I did a quick search, but couldn't find anything current to see if he's still doing the same thing or.
I can't imagine entering back into the community. That would be the real difficult thing.
Yeah,
I think so.
I mean, if you were just taken out of your environment for 30 years, say, and then you're expected to
get back in. Yeah.
Right.
He went to live with mom, I think.
Well, good thing.
Good old mom.
I felt really sorry for him. Didn't anybody else feel sorry for him? That we talked about his survival. You know, everything was about survival. He was mentally ill. And for him, contact with society was like death. I mean, it was scary. It was frightening. He did what he could to survive. And I just, my heart kind of went out to him. I mean, yes, he on the backs of other people, but I don't think he was a mentally well person doing that. And so to condemn him in the way that we are here, it's like, we don't do that to people we regard as mentally ill. We try to get them help and we feel sorry for him. And he did enter therapy. he served some time in prison. The judge felt sorry for him. He gave him minimum sentences, and he did enter therapy, and he was getting a little bit better by the end of the book. But I don't know. You guys seem to be so hard on him. I'm so surprised.
I don't know that he was unhappy though.
No,
in his 27 years. So I'm not sure there's a way to, you know, we can be sorry that people have mental illnesses, but I'm not sure he was an unhappy person during that time that he was living on his own.
But just to call him mental ill, I think it's a stretch.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that he was very different. And is that mentally illness?
No, I don't think so.
I don't know.
Yeah, the fact that it was so painful to him to be in society around people, be part of the culture, was so emotionally and physically painful for him. I think there's something very different about that. And I don't know, I felt so sorry for him. I really did, that somebody hadn't reached him sooner and helped sooner, that he didn't have, you know, he wasn't caught sooner. So sad to me.
When I was in college, I had a nun that was in her 80s, and she taught church history, and she was an excellent educator. But she said the hardest thing for her, all those years she was in the convent, was the social thing. So she was a lot like he was. She joined a convent and led, you know, somewhat solitary life in that she could do what she wanted, except when she had to go to meals and things like that. She said that was the most difficult thing for her to do. And there was nothing wrong with her. It's just the way she was made up.
Right.
So I think, you know, we tend to think of the norm always. Are we normal? Probably not. Who knows? And should we be normal? Maybe not.
Well, in that last scene where the author is talking to him and they're both crying, and he says, I came to think, this is the closest I ever to understanding why Knight left. He left because the world is not made to accommodate people like him. He was never happy in his youth, not in high school, not with a job, not being around other people. It made him feel constantly nervous. There was no place for him. And instead of suffering further, he escaped. It wasn't so much a protest as a quest. He was like a refugee from the human race. The forest offered him shelter. And he said, I did find a place where I was content. So he was content. I guess he didn't know that he would feel content after day one, but day one turned into week one and month one and year one and year 27. You're content. I don't know. You know, one thing just I think it was just
he expressed himself so well too. At least that's how it's portrayed.
Sure.
So he was highly intelligent.
Tracy, Sue has got her hand up. Sue's got her hand up.
I can't see. So go ahead, Sue.
When I was growing up in Jacksonport, we had someone break into our home twice. And they lived in it for probably a week. They ate a lot of canned goods. They stole my grandfather's binoculars, cameras, TV. I mean, they terrorized rural Jacksonport on the lakeshore for a long time. So I related to this differently. I thought that guy should have been caught and just, you know, he was terrorizing people. Look at how those families were afraid for so long. I mean, I grant he had his issues, but he still terrorized people. And I remember how my family felt when we came home and everything was gone and messed up and trashed twice, and they never caught anybody. So, I mean, I could relate that way. And I was hoping he was really going to get the books. I was not happy. It was an interesting story. But I thought the guy should have, you know, he put a lot of people on edge for many years. So I guess I looked at it from that, you know, that point of view.
Yeah. So what year was that?
That would have been in the mid 60s. And finally a deputy found footprints in the snow, and then they went in and they discovered the first one. But that person had gone up and down Cave Point Road for probably one winter, and then there was a break, and then it was another winter. That person lived in all those homes for probably 2 months. You know, and they'd always go in and before a snowstorm, so the snow covered their footprints. So, I mean, and it was probably someone local. That's what they figured, but never got anything back. And I think many people lost binoculars, cameras, and had food consumed and liquor consumed for a long period of time.
Actually, I'm surprised he was in as good a health because, you know, animals are designed to do that, to put on weight, spend the winter, lose their, you know, and all that. And he was doing that every year, putting on a whole lot of weight, taking the weight back off. And of course, it sounded like his teeth were horrible because he, you know, he
didn't eat good food.
He didn't eat good food. No, you would wonder where his cholesterol was and blood pressure.
Yeah, that's why he didn't go to the doctor.
And rotted his teeth from all the crud that he ate.
I wonder if he would have ever been caught if he hadn't gone to that group camp.
But he had been to the boot camp.
That's true. So they were looking for
He had made a key and everything.
Yeah, he wanted to. He realized that was a good source of.
What was the new surveillance thing, wasn't it?
Right.
That actually caught him.
But you know, I'm just wondering.
Because you know, we didn't all have cameras and stuff 20 years ago. We didn't. You know, now people have it on their phone. My God, anyone that wants to burglarize it better know what they're doing. Because...
Go ahead, Linda.
I just thought it was interesting when he said that he never got sick because he wasn't around people. So there was no vectors around to make him sick.
Yeah.
And given what's going on now, I just thought that was such an interesting comment.
Yeah, we didn't. Nobody had colds or flu.
Yeah.
And he ate nothing that wasn't prepackaged, so we, you know, didn't have to worry that it had been. Well, I think he got worried about poison.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why he wouldn't eat anything that wasn't sealed.
Yeah.
But I can understand the neighbors who were freaked out. I would be freaked out if I never knew someone comes in my house and it's freaky, just someone coming in your house and you not knowing it.
Right. When kids call him a monster or some one of the families and children referred to him.
Yeah.
It's very violating.
Yes,
to have someone, even if they don't take anything, just to know someone's walking around in your house and
you didn't know it.
So was there anything about his lifestyle living out where he did that was appealing?
Not to me.
To anyone.
Yeah, how did he really get through those winters? I mean, I don't know that they went into that enough. That the author should have.
No, but he wasn't talking a lot.
I was going to say he wasn't real chatty about it.
Yeah, well, that's
I mean, that was one of the frustrating parts about this book for me was trying to get all the. I kept thinking, why don't they talk more about this? That's because he didn't want to say it.
He did talk about being near death.
Right.
One or two of those winters, and he did learn not to go to sleep.
Right.
Because he has to keep moving and get up.
And he would go to bed. He would go to sleep at 8 o'clock at night. And then get up at 2:30 in the morning and wander around.
So he got through the winters, and as long as he said, it's. I've been reading some other things, but it's more important to be dry than warm. And that's a thing you learn very quickly.
Right.
When you're outside. I think one of the things that intrigued me the most, besides the fact that he never used fire, I'd be hard pressed never to have a fire. But he's right. He was absolutely right about smoke, because he wasn't very far from people, not at all, in terms of smoke traveling or lights being seen and so forth. But I think one of the things that intrigued me about that lifestyle is the opportunity to be alone for that long period of time. And I wonder if I have it in me to come to self-realization, to move forward with that knowledge, to actually gain knowledge of yourself. We're all so busy, and even when you're alone, for a couple of days because your spouse goes away and your kids are grown and you don't have a job, you're retired, so you don't have to do anything. You've got 2 days. Is this, it takes a long time to settle into any of that solitude. And there's a difference between, it's interesting to read about different definitions of between quiet stillness, solitude, silence, all different words meaning different things. And I just wonder if not just the need to survive and the skills to get the skills, but just that the interior landscape you have to spend time exploring. If I would learn anything, I don't know. You read about people, and that's why I don't meditate, for instance, because I can't ever just sort of quit planning my day, or like, oh, I have to learn these plants before my next hike, So, but I never ever, on the other hand, give it time. Right. I never developed the skill, and so I just don't know if I'm capable of it. But I do think. I think he came to some realizations, and that was he just kept going. That this was something he was going to continue to do. That had to be a conscious decision, not just inertia.
Right. To me, it was interesting that he couldn't get bored. That was not part of his the whole thing, and I think I could. I think that I would get bored.
That's a good quality.
It's a very good quality.
I have been on silent retreats. We don't talk to anybody for. I couldn't make it through a week. It was 2 days, and I nearly died.
Why do I not have trouble?
And as Jane said, I brought things to read, and you could read, but then you got bored because you couldn't talk to anybody. So I mean,
but he talked about just sitting there and just being, and which is what meditating kind of is, really. So he's a way different person than I'm ever going to be.
He talked about non-doing, and that there's isn't nearly enough nothing in the world anymore.
I do agree with that.
Well, what's a good amount then?
I don't know. 27 years, I think. I think we got close with the COVID and the masking and staying home. That was close.
I think for instance, you read articles about not letting kids be bored these days. From boredom can come good ideas, a lot of self-knowledge, a lot of, well, if I'm bored, what can I do about it? Sorts of things, and to alleviate that boredom. I think it's harder for kids to be bored these days. I think they get bored with their screen time or with different things, but I think that's a different sort of boredom. It's almost like I don't know. It's not an opportunity to fill time with something else. Anyway, and boredom is nothingness.
Well, and if you look at people who have invented things, they often were very quiet children who didn't have anything to occupy them. They just were by themselves, and they developed that thinking ability.
I'd like to point out that the author really explored the idea that in some cultures, these people are treasures, that hermits are treasures, and they leave food for them and they cater to them. And the fact that they are sitting there in isolation and contemplation and being one in nature, they can live almost vicariously through them and learn from them. And so, so in some cultures, he would have been fully supported, and it wouldn't have been ceilinged. It would have been acceptable to just leave things for him. They tried to, but he was afraid that it was traps, and he knew in the society that it wasn't acceptable. So the author was just sort of pointing out that in other cultures, and I remember there's in England in a certain period, it was trendy to have your own private hermit. You would hire people to be a hermit on your estate and have somebody living and pay them, to do that. It was part of the garden. The garden state was your own private hermit. I just, I had read about that before. And so it reminded me again of that, and I found that very amusing.
It almost seems like too bad, like that could have been an opportunity if people were willing to leave food for him instead of him stealing it.
Yes, some people left.
They did leave food.
They even left them little notes and asked them what he wanted.
Yeah.
I think there are some differences. Intention matters, and he never really interacted enough for people to understand his intention. I mean, he didn't interact at all. He just disappeared. That's hard on his family. And then reacquainting himself with society is similar to what inmates go through, but there's always a difference. His was absolutely chosen. And of course, inmates are never choosing that. And solitary confinement and compared to this is also very different because one is forced isolation and another is chosen solitude, and they're just totally different. But I do think he never gave anybody a chance to help him out. And that was a choice he made. He was happy with that choice as far as we can tell. I don't condemn him for that. I do wish he had learned to fish. Yes. I mean, fishing lake, snares, because you can cook on the propane stove. You can cook rabbits. He was cooking. Rabbits are I think he was mostly heating himself propane, judging by the preserved foods he had, or whatever they're called. But I think, but then he has to expose himself as well. Although it's just. It's an interesting 27 years. I find him an interesting character that he could do it and sustain it, learn it. But I do think he committed enough violations that really
it's wrong.
Just skews it slightly over to the side of you need to figure out how not to do that, and he should have been able to figure it out in 27 years. For sure. I think something, right? And I don't begrudge him the lifestyle. I don't begrudge him being a hermit. It was hard on his family. Any of that, even leaving the car for his brother. That was like such a off the wall decision he made very quickly. But it's the continuity of. Entering people's private domains, knowing the consternation he must have caused. I assume he knew the consternation. So
I didn't read the book. So how did he get caught?
Cameras, and
they started using a lot of trail cameras and really high.
And jingles. I mean, the ever vigilant. An alarm went off. Alarms. I think it was a state cop who was determined to catch him.
And he had a really sophisticated camera.
So they caught him out of his domain.
In the Girl Scout camp.
He was at his favorite kids camp getting his favorite meal.
That he didn't know about.
So it was new technology that he was unaware of, and he surrendered very quickly once he got there. He was never violent himself, from what we know. So it's just an interesting study in somebody who just simply has gotten off the rail.
Well, one of the things they talked about was the science where each of us inherits from our parents a certain level of need for social inclusion. And if you don't have enough of the pituitary peptide oxytocin, sometimes called the master chemical sociability, and you have high quantities of the vasopressin, which suppresses your need for affection, you tend to have fewer interpersonal relationships. So, blame it on our parents.
So is my fault. I went with oxytocin for 4 years. That's why I did graduate school.
Oh, wow. Go ahead, Janet. Then we'll get to Sue.
Something that we haven't at least expressly addressed, that to me, as I'm listening to all of you, cropped up again, and that is, many of us are probably mothers or fathers.
Well, there's one of them.
If I were his mother, no matter how suppressed my oxytocin levels and need for sociability or whatever else, and I'm not making fun of that, I think that's an incredibly interesting point that you just made. But even though they were obviously a very self-isolating family, that came out again at the end when, they gathered around him and didn't want to talk to anyone and didn't want him to talk to anyone. Regardless, his mother had her son disappear when he was 20 years old and never knew what happened to him. And I don't know where, no matter where he is on the spectrum, yes, he certainly is not a normal person. There must be some level of mental illness. And to your point, Jamie, that's to be, we need, I think, need to be sensitive to that. But that is just so cruel and so narcissistic. Like he didn't want to be outed, so he wasn't going to be in touch with his family and let them know that he was safe. I'm sorry. I just find that not very forgivable.
But his mother was, I mean, the whole family was definitely, it definitely was a big genetic
Because they never
part of it. Yeah.
They were never reported him.
They never reported him missing, no.
You would think report on your own by lawsuit.
You know, I'm gonna go ahead. I think when people have either a mental illness or an addiction, it's not uncommon that you may not hear from your child for months, maybe for a year. And all you can do is try and let them know, we're here, we love you. And they may not respond. So there's a medical, a health component in that. And again, we don't know a lot about, or I didn't read the book, so I don't know. I don't know a lot about Christopher's background and his health background, mental health background. But he may have been in a place where he didn't think about doing that, about letting his parents know that he was okay, and how would he have done that, and without getting caught. I mean, all these things are very complicated. You know, how do I get that communicated without somebody knowing I've done it, and then they're going to come find me? I don't want to be found. And so I think it's just complicated. I don't know that it was narcissistic. I don't think he probably thought about it being narcissistic.
I wonder how he would have let them know.
Yeah.
Not by cell phone.
Sue's been trying to say something. Go ahead, Sue.
I'm just surprised, you know, the car was there. They didn't have more of an effort to find the guy. At first, I kept thinking that was going to happen, and they really never mentioned much of that. If my 20-year-old disappeared, I'd sure be looking for a long time. But of course, this was a long time ago. Maybe they didn't do the helicopter flyover. But I mean, I thought that they would have found him before this time period would have passed. That just kept kind of nudging at me the whole time I was reading this book.
I was surprised a dog that they didn't use dogs.
No.
Yeah, right.
Even if he didn't break any branches, the dogs would have been able to follow the scent or something.
But why would people go out and find him if she didn't call the police or nobody?
Right, that's
so
what I say. They had no idea.
Because in our own case, when one of our kids was in Tucson, and we didn't hear from him for probably about 2 weeks. Well, I called the police immediately, and I said, "Can you go to this house and find him?" Well, he was fine. But, you know, boys don't call you all the time.
You don't want us to know.
They don't. They'll communicate when they want to. I had to learn text messaging so I could communicate.
Oh yeah. I used to leave phone messages, call your mother or die.
Yeah.
Well, didn't the whole family seem to be rather loners? I mean, it wasn't exactly a normal family, I don't think.
She baked them a cake every year on this birthday.
Yeah, that's right. She did.
She probably thought maybe somebody would just show up on his birthday. The cake would be ready.
It's true.
People do odd things.
Yes.
And sometimes I think, you know, we're getting a look into the interior of a family, but barely. I mean, there's so much missing information, and it just seems that they're really peculiar. But no, they're not peculiar families. I mean, there's so many teachers here. There's just so many.
Most of our families somewhat dysfunctional in one form or another.
There's so many permutations of how families run. And so frequently what makes the news is the dysfunctional ones. But I mean, look at the books we've been reading. What was education about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
My God, I'd rather have this family than that. And, you know, Billy Elegy and some of those others. Heartland. You know, there's so many things, but it seems... what's the piece of every family's happy in the same, whatever that quote is from. In the same way and sad in their own ways, or whatever, tragic in their own way. And this is tragic in their own way. So just unable to have those, or to demonstrate or show those deeper feelings, or that those, even to the extent of excluding touch, let alone expressing perhaps what they felt. I don't know, so maybe it was mostly chemical, and then it becomes behavioral, and then he leaves at 20. What do 20-year-olds know? I mean, they know a lot. This one should have maybe known better, but he didn't seem to have a lot behind him.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just found him an interesting character.
He wasn't go back to live out, no.
I kind of wondered about that.
Whether he's go back.
He's not supposed to. He's living in prison. I mean, he only did 7 months, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And plus a long probation, and he had a lot of rules to follow. And he was following them because he didn't want to go back, because they laid it on the line and said, there was a long probation for somebody who is just brand new at behaving that way. Was it 7 years or 8 years, or
I think it was 3.
Yeah. Okay. Because I thought at one point they said he'd go back for 7 years.
Or was it?
Yeah. If he missed any, yes,
right.
If he missed things, he'd go back for 7 years.
So yeah, what did we think of that sentence? Was it fair? Was it too much? Was it too little?
The judge must have felt like Samson. I mean, really, you've got this person who is clearly not quite with it, or able, or has been so removed for so long, and he was making a living the best way he knew how, whether or not you agreed with it, but on the other hand, he was violating people's property. He was doing it a long period of time. He's scaring people.
Well, one thing I read between the lines, that evidently he became an alcoholic on the way. Wasn't there something?
Yes, at the very end of the book, you got the impression that he, because he drank a lot of alcohol, he said, because that was what one of the things that put the most weight on him was drinking alcohol. And so during the winter, he would steal a lot of alcohol.
But he wouldn't drink Miller Lite. He only would steal the Budweiser.
Yeah, he would steal the Budweiser, but not Bud Light.
I know.
That's the other thing. So
it must have been hard to sentence him. 7 months is of course nothing, but that long probation with strict rules. He had to go to therapy. He had to show up at court or before his parole officer every week, which is hard. He had to get a job. He had to go into therapy. I mean, he's coming off 27 years of isolation.
Yeah, he never had to do anything.
Right. Well, he had to survive. He had to do a lot of things, but according to his own time schedule and his own wants and desires. That's what a switch. So,
well, that's why I found that small section where he opens up to the author about the lady of the woods, and he talks about that. And that was very interesting.
Yes, yeah.
And the reaction of the author, I thought, was interesting too.
Right. Interesting place to find yourself in when someone admits they're going to.
I just wanted to mention something. Years ago, I did a study of the homeless in public libraries. And one of the main things that I discovered was that they weren't just sitting around in a shelter or in the public library. They were working. They had to know every single day which shelters were open at which times of the day and which soup kitchens had meals at which times of the day. And I thought about this guy, and you were talking about boredom. He wasn't doing nothing all the time. He was working at surviving. And so he was thinking up ways to survive. He was thinking of ways to have communication with the outside world. He wanted to know what was going on. He knew everything that was going on, including the Kardashians.
Yes.
So, that's sort of interesting. There's the whole thing about the silence and the contemplation and the meditation. And then there's the whole other aspect of figuring out, which is expending energy to figure out how to survive.
Well, he did a lot of reading too. And as far as the sentencing, the judge pointed out that it would be very cruel to have put him, after what he had been, how he'd been living, in jail for any longer. You know, he only had one more week, but like you said, he had all those other, you know, requirements that were fair.
That's why I didn't think the word hermit was a very good definition for him, because especially when you talked about when he wanted to know so much about what was going around him in the world. To me, a real hermit, and don't ask me why I have this definition in my head of a hermit, but to me, a hermit is someone who wants to get away literally from not only people and touching. I don't give a rip about the Kardashians. I mean, why would he care about the Kardashians? Why would he even want to hear all this stuff on the radio? Read books, maybe, you know, to just stimulate your mind and that sort of thing. But to know current events and things, if you're a hermit and you want to get away from all that, why was he still interested in that?
I think he needed the weather report.
Well, yes, he needed the weather report.
You can do a lot on your own, but the weather report really helps you know when
to steal. Yeah.
And maybe it was a way of knowing about people and things without having to interact with people.
But if you don't want to interact with people, why do you care about what they're doing?
Right. The brain is a strange word.
At that point, though, he could choose what he wanted to listen to and read. If you're out in the world, he had all this other stimulation. And I think Asperger's was a good description, because I don't think he wanted to be around other people.
Physical.
I found interesting too how time became a whole different thing for him. That reminded me, I watched my grandchildren when they were little. They have no concept of time. Small children don't. And parents typically, they just teach them because they have to know to function. But he didn't have that requirement. So he had the seasons, he had the moon, and all of a sudden he had all those requirements to be someplace at a certain time. That must have been very difficult. Yeah.
It must have been wrenching in some ways.
So just making him go back into society was probably the worst punishment they could instill.
And the fact that he didn't react or blow up or just like have a meltdown at some point never seemed to.
Yeah,
he just did what he had to do, you know.
No, but he said he was getting very nervous. Wasn't he saying that?
He did. I mean, you wouldn't notice that seemingly from looking at him or whatever.
What did you think about the relationship of Christopher Knight and the author?
I thought it was interesting that the author originally decided, you know, I read about it being captured. And then he's in Montana. So he all these.
This was a redemption novel for the author. He almost had lost his career. He had claimed to be writing something truthful, and he had made composite characters and made stuff up in terms of a report that he had done, and he'd almost just lost it. So he was very clear. I found this whole process fascinating, this interview process. He was so careful all along the line, and his preface and his epilogue in talking about who he had interviewed and all of the documentation on this and everything. He was very, very careful, make sure so that nobody thought he was making any of this up. So I had known about him. There was a documentary about him and also a film, made a fictionalized account about this author and how he had, I don't know what that's called when you, it's not.
There was an accused murderer that was impersonating him.
Oh, that's right. That movie was fascinating. Yes, there was an accused. So not only was he just really panned, professionally for having made this stuff up. Then on top of that, there was somebody else who was impersonating him and pretending to be him and complicated his life even further. So the story about the author himself is really fascinating if you want to follow up on that.
he had originally, he was a journalist for the New York Times, but after it came out that he really kind of embellished this story,
I remember that.
He lost that job. And he said he wasn't going to do any media, any journalism, anything after that. But this man who was accused of murdering his wife and children fled and impersonated Michael Finkel. And so when he learned about that, he investigated it and eventually got in contact with this guy when he was in prison, and they started a dialogue. That's partially why he knows so much about the prison system. And he wrote a book called True Story, and then it was made into a movie with Jonah Hill, James Franco, Felicity Jones, also called True Story. So that was kind of his.
What was the year on that?
The year on the movie, yeah, 2015, I think that says.
Yeah, but his story is older than that.
Yeah.
And the New York Times said this was one, and then there was another one that was embellished too. And that makes a big deal, and the Times has to say something.
Well, he was certainly very persistent. I mean, think about, at least that's what I thought. I mean, I would have given up a long time ago. Like, he obviously didn't want them to come. So.
Plus, he had to travel quite a bit. I mean, it wasn't like he was in the same state.
He was in the same state, or something like on the other side. Yeah.
I do think he was respectful, or at least as presented, the author seemed respectful of how Knight was, how he behaved, what his needs were. Did push a few times or persisted a few times, but he seemed respectful and let things go, which I think is probably why Knight then did share some things with him. Because as Knight said, we're not friends, we're not ever going to be friends, I don't ever want to see you again. It is true, and I thought that was interesting. Knight, it had shed a few of the veneer of civilization with some of his conversations. There are so few people who would really speak that way.
And not even the police were respectful, and I mean, they wanted to catch him, but it wasn't a vendetta where we're going to get you at all costs, and you know, they let him sit there and tried to talk to him, and the judge being trying to decide how to sentence him could have done much differently.
Yeah. People seem to understand, and it's the idea I got was that he did not come across as a violent person. I think that's the hardest part about having people break into your house, or this consistent pattern. We tend to read about how these escalate. So it could have become dangerous. I think, and that's the kind of thing that really scares people, is you don't know where it's headed. But the people who came across him seemed to right away get the feeling that he wasn't going to escape. He wasn't going to get violent. He wasn't armed. So it's.
Well, he never trashed houses, really.
No, he wasn't trashing it.
And then he fixed it when he went back out again.
He took the door off so he didn't have to break the hinges, and then put the door back up.
Fixed the window thingy bobs and stuff.
Right. So he was respectful, other than stealing. He was respectful of people's property.
Well, some people were understanding, but other people were very angry about it and felt violated. And as far as the author, I mean, he acted like he didn't want to speak to him. He didn't like him, but he did talk to him for the full hour every time. And I think they had a pretty good relationship.
Well, yeah, as far as it could go.
That's right.
He even learned that little trick of getting the phone back on so you could talk until the guards made you move. He didn't have to do that.
Right.
And when he told him not to come anymore, wrote that note, I think part of it was his family was just so against that author being anywhere near him.
Maybe.
Did he have siblings?
Yeah. His brother with the car. And then there wasn't there another sister.
Did she? Was she still alive?
That was just
they lived together, the mother and the sister. And
He said he
Does anyone know if the author shared any of the profits with him?
What?
Profits.
I have no idea.
I have no idea. That's a good question though.
No idea.
Profits. Did Finkel share in one of the books to make either with him or into a fund or some sort of way to get that?
The camp that he stole from the most was for disabled kids. Yes. And that was the one that he, I mean, many years, the same camp.
Because the stuff was always there. It was
wow. Yeah.
And a lot of
well cared for.
A lot of it.
And a lot of it. Yes. I thought that was interesting too. But there it was. It could have been any camp. So, but that was the one that was nearby.
Why do you think he went from Massachusetts to Maine?
Only
because I have a son that moved to Massachusetts, and I'm a Midwest gal, right? So I have to go visit him now in Massachusetts, and I know Maine, and I know Massachusetts. I'm like, oh.
It's more desolate.
I grew up in Massachusetts.
And you know what Maine is like.
I do. That's why you go to Maine if you want to lose yourself. Maine is the end of the earth.
And the people there are
nobody there, they're all nuts. They're all nutters. Have you read the beans of Egypt, Maine? Yes. They're all nuts. Yeah. Oh, right. That's why you go to Maine. That's why you went to Maine. What? Very. Oh yeah, they're all nutters. Yeah. They are. No, Maine is just isolated. It's sort of like, in a way, because it sticks up. It's like the UP. It's a different isolation. It's a different culture. There's a very, very wealthy Florida on the coast. It's like Florida. Inland is like Immokalee in Florida, and it's totally different economies. People mind their own business. They hunt. They fish.
They don't talk a lot.
They don't talk well. You can't understand them.
Did anyone look at it? Did anyone look at a map to see where this place is?
I hope none of us are right in the middle and feeling offended.
Oh, my relatives are from Newfoundland and Maine. My grandmother might have a comment. So you go around and say,
it's very isolated. I looked online.
No, I think it's isolated, and the states are smaller. It takes no time. If to go through Massachusetts, to Maine is only 20 miles. Because in New Hampshire's in between. New Hampshire's in between, and it's a 20-mile coastline. So you drive up the coast, it's only 20 miles. I used to go to from Massachusetts to Maine. And Maine is a very large state. Isn't it the largest state east of Mississippi except Georgia?
You've got fishing in there.
That's the largest.
It's a big state. So I think Maine is isolated.
So I have one more question. Okay. And then we'll see if there's any further comments. I thought it was interesting when the author kind of brought the question up to himself and to his family and other people. And did it make anyone else think, what's the longest you've been without human contact? Did that make anyone else think a little bit of a funny story?
2 days silent retreat.
Well, yeah,
but there were other people.
But you must have had meals.
We couldn't talk. Well, we had meals, but how would you like to eat a meal? And you can't say a word to them.
Well, you're sitting here just like this table, right? And you're eating.
Yeah, but you can't.
I know, but there's people, you can see them.
So I had to go to Ohio. When we had just moved here in October of 2013, and I had to start going to Ohio periodically because one of my sisters was very ill to help take care of her. And I came home after a week one time, and Carl, my husband, was like, "Oh, hi, Howard." I said, "Carl, what happened? What's wrong with you?" So he had not talked to anyone for a week. And I said, "How did you do that? Why did you do it?" I just didn't need to.
So, yeah. Did he go out? Was he in the house the whole time?
The whole time.
Oh, yes. Oh, my husband, because he likes to go to Isle Royal. And he hikes, backpacks Isle Royal by himself. He would do that. It'd be so happy. Well, but I asked him because occasionally he would see a park ranger, but there was a time when he literally hiked and walked for 4 days and did not talk or see another human being, and he loved it. Absolutely loved it.
I mean, this is after he had just retired and he was really ready to be himself.
This was pretty funny again, Castaway.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I got a coconut.
Yeah.
And the volleyball.
Soccer ball.
Yeah. Yes, it was a soccer ball. Soccer ball.
Yeah. But I think too, and so much of it is, we go away for 4 days or to the boundary waters or whatever for weeks at a time. You could do it by yourself, even people can do that. But it seems a different choice. I think you go into it knowing it's going to end.
Right.
You prepare for that. You have the resources lined up. That is in fact without human contact, and it is an interesting thing. But it seems it's more like a hiatus, as opposed to a way of life, or even an anticipated way of life that you might not be able to put up with. It just seems like just a change. So it would seem different, but at least it would be 4 days without, or a week.
27 days.
2 days.
Well, I don't even go to the boundary waters by myself.
Well, it's dangerous. I mean, I hike by myself all the time, but it's
one night. It's different.
Or everybody in my house would go.
And I went to bed early.
Boy Scouting, including my husband, because he was the leader, and the kids would go, and he'd go, and I'd stand at the end of the driveway saying, "See ya!"
But then I had the son that always got in trouble before they went, and he got punished by having to stay home. You're punishing me, or you're punishing him.
I would have said it anyway.
I read a good quote yesterday. I was ordering some books, and this was for one of the books I ordered. It said, "I spent so much time seeking solitude, and when I realized what I really wanted was privacy." I feel that way sometimes.
There is a joke.
That's what the bathroom's for.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes. Any comments from those online before we wrap up?
Well,
just one thing.
I do another Zoom earlier, so I can't join until late. Maybe you already discussed his words of wisdom. Get enough sleep.
Yes. Oh, we didn't, but that was a good one. Yeah.
And it's true.
I thought that was really, something that was his words of wisdom. Get enough sleep.
Okay.
I just wanted to share a Maine story about my favorite expression from people from Maine is, if you stop to ask them directions, is that they say, "You can't get there from here." You can't, and because they have all these peninsulas, and then the woods, the road into the woods, they just go and they dead end. He just drove in and he stopped because the road ended and he left the car. And so when you ask directions, they look around and they look a little puzzled and they go, "No, you can't get there from here." And it's such an ironic thing to say, it doesn't make any sense at all, but it makes perfect sense to a down Mainer.
Yep. That's the other thing. Yeah, Maine is down east. When you're in Massachusetts, it's
down east.
That's right. It's down east. Yep.
It's a sailing term, down east.
That would bother me.
Yeah, down east. Yeah. I grew up in Massachusetts and spent a lot of time up there as well as a kid. Went to camp up there and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, I grew up in Massachusetts. Used to go down Maine and go to camp with people. Yes, and their hunting camps.
All right, one further question. How did this work? Online people, could you hear us and see us mostly okay? Nothing's going to be perfect, but was this better?
It was perfect for me.
Better than outside.
Yeah, that didn't work so well. We tried it.
It worked, but no.
Sue, do you have something to say about that?
It was interesting to be an observer because after a year of not gathering, you are the loudest, most raucous group I've heard in a long time.
Oh, I will mention that my home library in Chicago just started meeting in person again, but we were just told our meeting is this Saturday, and we were just told that after not having to wear masks, the word came down that we wouldn't have to wear masks if we were fully vaccinated. But yesterday we were told that the city had changed its mind And now we had to wear masks inside the library. We could still gather, but the masks were back. So we're not at the end zone quite yet. We can't dance in the end zone, but things are improving.
Apparently the cases have gone up because of the Delta variant. The cases have gone up 20% and the death rate is up again, but it's all with non-vaccinated people.
Yeah, I come from Missouri.
Well, it is changing.
Well, we will see what next month holds. Hopefully we can still meet. Hopefully we can still be here. We will meet August 4th to read or to discuss The Life We Bury by Allen Eskens.
Another prison.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? Please say it again.
August 4th. The title is The Life We Bury by Allen Eskens.
B-U-R-Y?
Yes, B-U-R-Y.
The Life We Bury.
And I will be at the table next month. Woohoo!
You will. Good. Yes, you were.
I have one more Zoom and it's August 4th and that's the last one. So I'll
okay.
Zoom if we have it.
Very good.
All right. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Zoomers. Thank you, everybody.
Good. Well, you know what?
Great group. Thank you so much.